All right. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I am Jeremy. Um, let's see. Oh shit. There we go. Can you guys see me now? I don't know. Technical difficulties. Oh man. I'm gonna get this right one time. I swear to God. The video was supposed to go and jump to the next one, but it didn't. So anyway, what's up, UX fam? I think I said that already. How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I am Jeremy. I am super excited to have everybody here today. Before we get started, I got some housekeeping stuff to tell you about. The Beyond UX Design shop is open. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some of your favorite UX and software related quotes and pick up your copy of Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes, my new book. Get free shipping on all orders over $30. Stick around until the end for a special code for everybody hanging out today to get 25% off the entire order. Let's see. Today's episode and our event is brought to you by EdgeCase Design Company. Is your team feeling stuck bringing ideas to life? EdgeCase's integrated resources help companies solve problems, build dream teams, and craft better products. Say hello to your dedicated partner for design. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/EK to book a free discovery call today. EdgeCase, one partner, limitless possibilities. And if you haven't done already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for all their support. And as always, if you want to join those fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. You can get instant access to the entire video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. So last week I had the one and only Emily Anderson on, and we talked all about how to account for the edge cases in your design. I'm going to go ahead and bring Emily on right now. Emily, I am so excited to have you on. Emily is the founder of the brand new, as of last week, design studio Ampersand. And I found out before the show she really likes my American accent. The way I say ampersand, apparently we say it differently. I don't know. I guess we do. Ampersand, like that. I don't know. You gotta put your pinky up when you say it. And having experience working among highly regulated and emotionally charged industries, Emily strongly believes in raising awareness of the positive and negative impacts that products and services can have on users and how this directly links back to the business. And coming from a physical product design background, her approach is to design beyond individual screens to understand the overall system that she's designing within. And you might know her from LinkedIn, where she regularly creates content to help change the narrative around how we think about users and help designers bring that unhappy path, context, inclusion, behaviors, and emotions into their day-to-day thinking. That's exactly what we're doing here today, Emily. Welcome to Beyond UX Design Live. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Hey, thanks so much. Yes, I'm super excited to be here. Also very nervous. I'm just going to say as well, I'm pretty ill at the moment. So I'm going to try my best not to kind of cough all over the screen and things like that.
We won't hold it against you.
Might have to keep like pausing.
For everybody listening, I told her several times we can move it, we can change it, and she insisted on keeping it. So I did not force this on her today. So I appreciate you being here through being sick, and we'll figure this out today. So Emily, last week we had an awesome conversation. Actually, the conversation was weeks ago, but I just published it last week. Everybody heard it for the first time last week. And we talked all about bringing those unhappy paths to the forefront, because those unhappy paths can absolutely make or break that experience for a user. And sometimes, like we said, even kill brand loyalty forever. So I know I just read your bio and some people may have listened, but some people today hanging out may have not listened. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you, your backstory, and then why this is so important to you? And then we'll just get into the questions, because we got a bunch of questions to go over today. Before we do that, actually, real quick, everybody hanging out, let us know two things. One, I want to know where you're from. So where are you hanging out from? And then two, start putting those questions in the comments down below, and we will start getting the questions. We got some questions that people posted ahead of time, so we got some primed up. But if you got questions, leave them in the comments, And now with that said, Emily, tell us a little bit about you. And I forgot what I told you to say, but go ahead. Whatever you want to say.
I think you just said just to say hi, basically. Yeah,
That's
so,
it. There you go.
yeah, I'm Emily Anderson. I don't know why I feel the need to say my second name, but I am a product designer, I guess, by title, but really I'm kind of a hybrid between kind of UX design and service design. I'm from a physical design background, and honestly, because of that, I felt like it's made me think more widely across the whole system rather than
Yeah.
just individual screens. I've worked across many different environments, from finance to gambling to healthcare and social care. And generally, there's been a lot of emotions involved from a user perspective of the impact that technology can have. And generally, I have seen like the positive and negative impact that tech can have on people. Now, a bit about my own story, which people may or may not have known if they followed me for a little while, and the reason as to why I post on LinkedIn. Honestly, is because a couple of years ago, my granddad unfortunately passed away. And as part of that sort of whole experience, that really difficult time, me and my grandma, we had to unsubscribe from all of his subscription services, which was really, really tough.
I
And
bet.
we had to either, completely cancel accounts or downgrade them or change them from her name to his name, and from his name into her name and things like that. And it was the first time I've ever honestly felt like responsible as a designer, because every time we unsubscribe from something, we would get an email to say things like, "We miss you, sort of Mr. Clark, come back again for 15% off," loads of crying emojis and things like that. And
Sure. Yeah. Oh God.
it honestly caused so much upset and anger to my grandma. And in my mind, I was just thinking, you are an unhappy path that nobody has considered. Like, people haven't thought about the reasons as to why people are properly leaving. And it
Mhm.
had firstly huge like reputational damage. There is a bunch of companies that we do not use anymore. I'm not going to name names, but like huge big companies where loyalty was just kind of broken. And I started I started writing about it on LinkedIn. I wanted to talk about, well, these are real people behind the real experiences that we design, and is there any way that I can help people to think about like risk and what can go wrong? So I started doing that about a year ago. I seem to have, by some miracle, stuck to it and carried on writing, and it seems to just
And
resonate.
impressive. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising to me. Like I said this before, I think this is something a lot of people feel. Designing for the happy path is something that most teams tend to do. Most designers tend to do it, and we talked about this in our episode. But that idea of service design, I love that you called that out. Thinking about the larger system and how everything works together, and the offboarding experience in your case is something that certainly I don't think enough people are kind of thinking about, and so I love it. I'm glad we're talking about it today. So we've got a ton of questions that people have submitted ahead of time. And again, if you're hanging out on LinkedIn or YouTube, go ahead and leave the comments in there, and we should start seeing those coming in. But first up, let's see. There's this really good one. I think this is maybe one of the better ones. When you think about edge cases, there's a lot to handle when it comes to UX design. Obviously, how do you balance trying to design for the majority of users going through that happy
mhm.
path while still accounting for, the edge cases and trying to keep everything from sort of just getting overly complicated? Is there a method to the madness?
That's not starting with an easy one, are you?
This is a good one. I like this one. I don't know. Yeah.
Um,
No
yeah,
softball questions here. I'll be
no
honest.
softball question. Right, it's really hard, and obviously I'm going to try as hard as I can to just not say it depends so much, because it's going to depend on like what we're designing and what the unhappy path is. I think the first thing I want to say is that when we're talking about, I guess here we're kind of using the terminology of like edge case and unhappy path and things like that. And generally what I like to do is just make it a little bit broader and just think about generally like what can go wrong and who might we be positively or negatively impacting, and like what scenarios could happen or could not happen. So it might be a case of, when we talk about edge cases, sometimes it's 0.0% of users are using this browser, like do we support that? Whereas an unhappy path might actually just be, I don't know, someone's credit card has expired, like what do we do with that payment method? So we're
Mhm.
probably going to be like fluctuating between what those things actually mean. In terms of the actual balancing, I guess, the attention and like the hierarchy on the page, I think the best experiences that I've seen are honestly the most like personalized and tailored ones. So they really understand like what are your goals and then kind of alter the experience for that from the off. So it's not necessarily a case of let's cram everything into this, into one journey. It's what are your goals? What are you trying to do? So if we go
Yeah.
back to, I probably talk about it far too much, but if we go back to, for example, like menstrual health apps, it's, are you trying to track your fertility? Are you trying to track a pregnancy? Are you trying to do this as this? So it's not making people feel bad by trying to cater for everyone in one experience. It's trying to tailor it to those different individual journeys.
Yeah, I love that. Now, I think you're talking about was it Flow?
So
The
Flow or Clue,
So there was one that you said did a really good job in our interview of allowing users to enter some maybe their own system
mm,
messages or something like that. And I was just thinking about this later that it was interesting the way they handled that. Instead of trying to account for every situation and every edge case, they let the users do it themselves, right?
yeah,
So they built sort of like a scalable, configurable system so that they didn't have to worry about offending somebody if they may have had some issue going on and whatever. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. I didn't even think about that until after we were thinking about questions for today. But I don't know. I'm just curious. Like thinking
yeah.
about that. I don't know. That's a very specific use case. But I'm wondering, is this something you've ever tried to think about in other scenarios that you've been working in or environments, whatever, where you can maybe offload that to users somehow? And it's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, so that one was interesting, I think, because so if you haven't listened to the episode, sorry, oh, it's happened.
It's okay.
It's starting already. I've lasted 13 minutes. So if you hadn't listened to that episode, it was basically custom notifications whereby you could, when you're coming up to the start of your cycle, you could personalize which notifications you wanted. So you could maybe
Mhm.
say, notify me on the day or notify me 2 days before. But you could also customize completely what the notification said. So if it was
Right.
quite an emotionally challenging sort of time of the month, you could write something that you knew would kind of alleviate some of that emotion. One thing that I've done before, in particularly when I've worked in social care is one of the most beautifully messy, like types of work I've ever done because there are so many different scenarios to consider. And
Mhm.
one of the things is when we were looking at it's called the rostering product, which is basically like when are the clients, the patients, but we call them clients, when are the clients going to get their visits? And how does that look on a calendar? So on a calendar view, do you do kind of midnight to midnight? But then the problem is that if they're at 8 p.m., then their visits will always be off of that screen. So
Mm,
what we tried to do instead for those people was, instead of trying to get the majority of what's the best window to show, which might not then cater for anyone,
right.
is then allow that configuration to say, right,
Yeah.
we'll put it back into your hands. It was a
Yeah.
lot more from the technical side, so obviously allow that to
Right.
happen, but then
Yeah.
it gave them control to be able to set it up in a way that made sense for them.
Now, here's another question that we got, and this is something I'm really interested in. Is thinking about that idea of scalable, configurable. It sounds great. You're offloading a lot of that work to customization, and the user can do their thing. But that means the developers have to do more. That means the team has to do more.
Mm.
So I'm curious, what strategies there that you've sort of implemented to convince the team that this other thing isn't actually the viable and MVP. It's not actually viable. This other thing, we need to do this thing. I'm curious how you convince them to spend those extra resources to get that experience. You have any strategies there you've used that worked?
So I think as much as I can, it's always trying to take like the subjectivity out of it and trying just to
Mhm.
be as objective as you can, because otherwise, of course, as designers, we want to be able to say, we want to do these 10 different scenarios and we want to be able
Mhm.
to do the best experience possible. But often that's not often the case of what gets built. So what I
Right.
always try and do is try and show like the impact that it will have. And that
Yeah.
might be, because quite often you can actually show the direct impact. You might be able to say, if we don't consider this thing, then it will block this many people from being able to use it, or actually this could be like a trust issue, or if we don't do this, it'll increase our support requests or whatever it is. Sometimes what might look small on the surface obviously can be huge. So to give you an example, there's a company called InPost, which is like Amazon lockers. if you know what that is. Like when you go and get your parcels from the locker.
Yep, yep.
And InPost did a really interesting thing where they had their lockers and they had a screen, and there was a little tiny checkbox that said, "I need a lower compartment." And essentially what had happened
Oh,
was
yeah, okay.
people that were in a wheelchair were not
Right,
able
right, right.
to reach the higher compartments. So when it would randomly pop open a high one, they couldn't do anything about it. And that tiny checkbox obviously had a massive impact in terms of the configuration of
Sure, yeah.
which ones are opened and things. But they had a huge amount of negative kind of press from these disabled users that weren't able to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
those compartments. So sometimes, yes, what might look small on the surface is a bigger technical effort, but then you can always directly link it back to that impact of this could happen or this could happen.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's interesting too. I'm just thinking about like I don't know. I'm 42. I got my back is always hurting. Bending over or something, like needing to go to the ones on the bottom. If you've got something, it's like it could easily be something too. I need a tall one. I need a high one. I need a low one. But yeah, that's I feel that one
Well, that one
I feel it right here
is
actually.
it's so much more inclusive in terms
Yeah,
of, yes, it might be somebody that might be potentially like a wheelchair user, but like you said, it could be a really heavy parcel, and you
sure.
might not
Yeah,
physically be able
yeah,
to reach it up to the top shelf, or likewise, you might not be able to lean down. You might need a lower one. Without going into like too much more detail, I think their app could have been even better if you could then almost search by location, like which one has got low compartments to save you driving there in the first place. But yeah, I think going back to your original question, so we're zigzagging quite a little bit,
that's okay. It's
is
our show. We do what we want.
that's fine. I have no idea how many people are here, or it might be just us.
Thousands, at least thousands for sure. Just imagine everybody in their underwear sitting in their home
Not
office and
gonna do that.
yeah, don't do that.
But yeah, it's all about, if you can, trying to be as objective as possible and not try and, I guess, bring the emotion into it and say this thing will happen or this thing will happen. And if you can bring it back to some business objective or
Right.
some like product metric or whatever it is. And because at the end of the day, a lot of what we do is we're doing it for a reason. Yes, we want to do it for users. Absolutely. We want to create the best experience, but we also are doing things to make the business more profitable or whatever it
Right.
is.
Yeah. Now you brought something up here, and we actually had a question about documenting some of these things. I don't remember exactly. The question was something about how do you document? I know in the in our interview, in the conversation, you mentioned you have a row on your journey maps or service blueprints about this, but I'm just curious. You just started listing out like all these other features. We could do this other thing, and we could have this, and I could search for this and search for that. I'm just curious when you're thinking about all these various things. And we're talking about edge cases, and I think in reality, a lot of this falls under the larger umbrella of probably accessibility. But
Mm.
how do you document a lot of these potential features so that they don't fall under the rug? And I mean, we all know how this generally works. You start building something. How often do people go back and update it unless it's like a giant commercial product or something? But I'm curious, keeping track of these things so they don't fall through
Mm.
the cracks or get swept under the rug. What do you like to do? How do you like to keep this top of mind?
Yeah, because a lot of things, they just go into Figma and Notion and they just die, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
They just kind of happen. And I think that, yeah, you're right. A lot of this is generally like inclusive design, is
Mhm.
trying to make sure that I really don't like to think of people as edge cases, because people are not edge cases. Like, people are
Yeah,
individual people, and in the end of the
yep,
day, like, yes, we are designers, but we are, first and foremost, we are humans that also experience these things too. So
yeah.
there's a few different things, and it completely depends on people's workflow and how they work and things like that. But so we generally, how I've worked in the past, have kind of tried to make more of like a single source of truth journey and keep that up to date as much as we can, in
Mhm.
terms of the risks and opportunities. What I've also done as well is kind of like a version of opportunity solution trees, I guess.
Okay.
So not necessarily like, here's all of the experiments and things that we're running, but what is our, I'm going to try and like imaginary draw it, but what is our like overall outcome, and then what are our like how might we's, and then listing out more of the like the tactical versus strategic opportunities that we have. And there we can start pulling out some of these ones that we've identified, and that one might be this. I've made these like huge trees in the past where we've then had all these different opportunities and tagged them by kind of effort versus impact. So you can go and
Mhm.
see, okay, well, if we've got a little bit of downtime between, I don't know, towards the end of the quarter or the end of the sprint, however you work or anything like that, is there any of these smaller, like quick wins that we can just take and run with? Or actually, can we use some of these other opportunities to define, depending on how your organization works, if it's like bottom
Right.
up or kind of top down, can we use some of these opportunities to define what we're going to work on in the next quarter or the next half of the year or anything?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I'm just thinking too, like making it really simple, right? Like you mentioned sort of determining level of effort. I don't know why I'm doing this with my hands. So I'm trying to do like the
'Cause I
quadrants,
talk
like
with my hands so
yeah,
much and like so
the level the level of effort to value, right? So obviously like low effort, high value, we want to target
yeah.
first. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I don't know, like I could see how you might throw some of these on like that 4 blocker
Mhm.
and towards the end of the quarter you have some downtime, let's find the ones that are low effort, high value kind of things. So I like that a lot. What tools do you like to use to document? You mentioned you called out like not putting it in Figma or Miro board or something kind of
Well,
dies. Is there a way? Is there a tool you like to use to keep track? Like, do you hop in Jira and write tickets, or how do you generally do that?
so I think it's really hard because there isn't one super brilliant tool. I think one that is kind of up and coming a lot more is They Do, if that's how you pronounce it. It's like a journey mapping tool. They're basically this company that this isn't sponsored or anything like that, but they're basically a company that believes that journeys should be in the heart of any business, and that's where
Ah,
you can start aligning opportunities, where you can start bringing obviously different parts of the business together. And
mhm.
I've played around with that before, and it looks pretty good to be able to start pulling out these opportunities. That's a bit more accessible than like a Miro board or Figma or something. Organizations I've worked with in the past use product board. Don't know if what your opinions are on that or not, because it's quite
I never
difficult.
actually used that one. Yeah.
Well, the difficult thing is that when an insight comes in, and I guess an insight can be anything, I have a bit of a bugbear because a lot of insights in there are kind of nuggets rather than a proper research insight. But the insight has to be directly tied to a feature. So you're almost defining what the solution is to the insight
Right.
already, like solutionizing as you're kind of recording it.
Right.
But sometimes that's really actually quite helpful to be able to list in a very long way to say, like, here's all of our opportunities. And again, it's like a hybrid of effort, impact. You can set your own metrics and things like that. I have written tickets before. I'm not
Okay.
a fan of writing tickets, but I
Yeah.
have written tickets
Yeah.
before
Okay.
in Jira, where generally anything that we release, any kind of feature that we release will always have like a risk section to basically say what can go wrong, have we considered it, are we okay with it, like yes or no, what's the impact of it, what's the likelihood, and then at least then it's documented as well.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of documentation.
Yeah, I love that. Do you? I'm curious. Like, when just this is off topic of of this, but I'm curious how you do it because I love talking to people about this. What tool do you like to use for documentation in general? Do you use like create your own? Like, do you have Notion? Do you have I don't know, like a wiki or something that you create, or like, you have a favorite?
I mean, it's really hard because so Notion I've used loads in the past, but I find
Hmm.
it really difficult because there's no constraints. Like, I used
Mm.
to love seeing line breaks in Word because I would know, "Oh, I've written 2 pages. I need to stream this back a little bit."
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
Notion, you can just keep going
Yep,
forever, which
you
makes
can. Yeah,
people, particularly when I've worked with, you know, PMs and there's been requirements docs and things like that, like, we're still in quite a culture, I think, of the more is better. Like you can just pad it out to be more, and people will like write and write and write.
yeah.
Um, the thing I've used, I guess, from if we're going more from like a research perspective, is Dovetail, just because it's really good with being able to
Okay.
like insights and
Yeah.
across different projects and things. Again, not sponsored before
Yep.
anybody thinks I'm doing
Not
some.
yet. I'm working with them actually. I'm trying to get them sponsored, but not yet. One day, soon, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm really
But
dropping all
yeah,
of these companies, and I'm not
yeah.
sponsoring any of them.
No, no. Yeah, that's by the way, if anyone ever listens to this stuff and wonders like if there's ever paid placement and stuff on the show, there is not. Mostly because I've never had the opportunity. No one's ever asked to pay to be placed on the show. But even so, I wouldn't do that. I think that's I don't know, my integrity as a host. I think
Yeah.
is more important than the $100 or whatever they pay me for that. So, all right, cool. So I'm curious. This is something we talked about in the show, and I want to dig in a little bit. This was not a user or a guest or sorry, a audience submitted question. This was one of mine. But
Uh-huh.
we talked last time about the not being a pessimist and not seeming like a pessimist. And obviously, when we talk about accessibility, I think that's a great way to
Mhm.
not seem like a pessimist here. When we talk about edge cases and things, I think you could, we talked about this in the episode, run the risk of seeming like you're always kind of like pointing out the pitfalls and the risks and everything else. I'm just curious from your perspective, trying to share these things with the team and always being the one, oh, Emily's got another edge case she wants us to worry about. I'm curious how you go about sharing these things with the team. Maybe we could talk more detail. How you do that and make sure these things are top of mind without just getting dismissed as like the pessimist or Debbie Down or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's such a fine line because it is really hard sometimes when at the end of the day our role is basically to help represent the user and make sure that we are sort of protecting them as much as we can and things like that. And sometimes it can come across like, well, have you thought about this and why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Or and that can be really, really tough. um I think that as I think the best way a lot of the time is to bring people. I mean, it sounds like everybody knows anyway, but just to bring people along with you instead of trying to, I guess, lecture people and say like this is absolutely the way we need to go. It's kind of like inviting people in and trying to reframe it to be like, actually, it's not edge cases and risks and unhappy paths and what can go wrong. All of that stuff isn't inherently a bad thing. It can be so positively flipped and reframed to say
Mm-hmm.
there is an opportunity here because if we do this thing, if we account for this person, then this thing can happen. And it's trying to not say, like I said, like shame people or make anyone feel bad or anything that we haven't considered X amount of people, but it's trying to reframe it into an opportunity because a lot of it is opportunities for the business or opportunities for
Mm-hmm.
the users. I think the biggest thing is absolutely, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is so much of it is just bringing everyone along with you and not making it like an us versus them dynamic.
Right. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, and that's like one thing I think is important for us to talk about too. And we had a question. Where'd it go? It was something about I can't remember exactly what the question was, but it was something about bringing the team along and trying to embrace this culture. And
Mm,
so that's something I'm really curious about, because what you want to do eventually is get to a point where everybody cares about this as much as you do. The product managers are thinking about it. You're thinking about it. The stakeholders thinking about it. Engineers are thinking about it. What are some methods that you've used in the past to get that team excited and motivated? I love that Antoine de Saint-Exupéry quote about, you want to build a ship, you don't bark out
mm.
orders and hand out tools, you teach them along for the vast and endless sea. I think it's like just another great example of that. How do you go about influencing and inspiring those people to care about this stuff as much as you?
So I think I have actually got to a point where I've worked with teams before and they're like, I thought of this scenario. And I'm like,
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome.
yes, brilliant. There's a few different ways I think, and as I said, it goes back to I think firstly building, really considering and knowing like who we're designing for, why we're designing for
Hmm.
it, and feeling like we're having a purpose, and building that like that empathy of we are designing for, regardless of what you're designing, whether it's an
Hmm.
enterprise product or B2C or whatever it is, like we are designing for people on the other side of the screen. It's not just users, and I think sometimes this could open a whole debate, but it's not just users, it is people on the other side of the screen that we're designing
Yeah.
for. And sometimes building that empathy in the team does help to build that like kind of emotional connection. There's
Yeah.
been a few things, and normally when we're starting on, if it's in an ideal world, when you're starting from scratch, from a you're scoping out a feature or whatever it is, or a piece of functionality, it's kind of thinking about going through a bit of a checklist of all of these different scenarios. So have we considered what environment they're in, where could they be, and almost like brainstorming with people like how could they use it, and setting up almost like a mini workshop. And people have come up with wild and wacky scenarios before where you literally just say like spend 5 minutes thinking about what could go wrong at this point. And
Yeah.
sometimes people come up with It's almost like a competition to see who can come up with like the weirdest scenario, because then it becomes a bit more, I don't know, it becomes a bit more fun,
Yeah.
to try and be like, well, actually, if you think about it, that could happen to someone. If you can think it, then it's likely that that might happen to somebody. And then you can go into more of the logistical elements of, what's our confidence or likelihood or impact and things like that. But generally, like I said, like bringing people along, because, engineers have great ideas, PMs have great ideas. We have great ideas as well. It's not just, we are not just the voice of the user.
Mhm.
Everybody is. So I think that that's one thing I've done before, as I mentioned, is almost have like a little mini brainstorm. And then other times it's been when I'm kind of um, building journey maps and all that kind of stuff, as I said, is having that kind of like risk gross to bring everybody in, and then they can sort of see where our level of thinking is. So at every single step, you can then question like what could go wrong here or here or here. And then when I'm looking at actual designs, is when I'm doing kind of pairing or reviews with engineers and things like that, is I've created like a component which for every piece of the UI, not every single piece, because not like a form, it might not be. But
Mhm.
again, there's a bit of a risk element of, could somebody misinterpret this, or could they misunderstand this, or could they delete it and need to undo it, and things like that. So there's different levels of granularity of thinking about like what can go wrong. Um, a lot of it is, as I said, is kind of giving those cues of, have we considered the environment? Have we considered the emotional impact? How could they be feeling? What could they be doing? What could they be thinking? What are their behaviors? And trying to give, facilitate those levels of thinking, rather than
Mhm.
just going away in a hole and coming back with like 50 scenarios that we need to consider.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so I see we got Joseph Murcieka on. He's hanging out. By the way, the chat here is not working
It's
in
not working.
Restream, so like it's blank. But there's people chatting in live. I'm kind of monitoring. Anyway, we got Joseph Murcieka, and he and I just did an episode a couple weeks ago. He's going to
Mhm.
be on the show in a few weeks. But we
Cool.
talked about designing for a global audience. We talked about dealing with international culture, different cultures, and things like that. And right before this, he sent me a link to an article about Nike Air Max. They had this on the bottom of the shoe. When you flip Air Max upside down, the logo looked sort of like. I mean, I could see how they actually. I saw it pretty. It was obvious to me, but it looked like Allah on the like the Islamic word for God, right? And obviously very offensive, especially on the bottom of a shoe. Huge PR mess
Mhm.
for Nike, but it got me thinking about designing for a global audience, and what
Mhm.
I think of and what you think of is totally fine. Other people might be completely offended or might have a completely different issue. So I'm just curious, like, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation. I know not a lot of designers have, but designing for a global audience,
Mhm.
what are some considerations? Like, how do you go about accounting for some of those things, especially when it's a completely different culture that you might not know anything about? Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts there? This is maybe a difficult question to answer. I have no idea how I'd answer this, by the way. But
Great.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
throw you under the bus. There you go.
Like, I'm just gonna drop this little and you're just gonna
Like,
squirt.
technical difficulties. Emily's gone. I don't know if she had a coughing fit. I don't know what happened.
She's a fraud. Yeah, I think, there's a whole bunch of things, because a lot of time when people think of, particularly if you're going into like international expansion, you might be a scale up and you're doing your first kind of
Mhm.
international market, and it's not just a case of like localization. It's a case of, is there a different culture there, or is there
Right.
something else that we need to consider? I think there's a whole bunch of things that we could talk about here. A lot of it is, that, kind of diversity, firstly in like teams that are building these things. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that, you are the user, but at least there's then representation in the business to be able to have those kind of more diverse opinions in businesses. Same with like research participation as well. I think that it's so important to have diversity in research participation, and not just exactly the same kind of screener of person.
Mhm.
What was really interesting, once I did a post about, what did I do, about notifications, and somebody commented, and I basically said like, notifications have the power to just ruin a great product, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's really true.
Yeah.
A lot of the time you can get a really bad notification and just think, I'm going to uninstall, or I'm going to delete that. And loads of people started commenting about their reasons why they've deleted apps before. And somebody commented and said, "Oh, I've uninstalled food delivery apps because I fast as part of my religion." And it's something I've not considered
Right.
before. I don't do that, and I just thought, wow,
Right.
that's so insightful and so important. And I wonder if anybody in that delivery company had thought about that, and if not, why? Like, is it because they hadn't researched? Is it because, I don't know, X percentage of their user base didn't fall into that category? Like, what was it? And I think that kind of stems back to trying to have this broader awareness of, we aren't all the same, like, cookie cutter people. We all have
Mhm.
different beliefs. We all have different makeups of what makes us us. Um, so in a really roundabout way, I don't know, but let's try and try and include, I'd say,
Yeah.
inclusion, particularly being more mindful about inclusion in research, and particularly in like hiring processes and things like that are super, super important.
Yeah. Yeah, I know this one's hard. I mean, and obviously, as you know, we're all mostly, well, most of us here are designing software, which can be accessed, generally speaking, from anywhere in the world. So even if we release something and we think it's, going to be mainly used in the United States, unless we lock it
Mhm.
down and it can't be used anywhere else, there's nothing keeping anybody else from from accessing that. So, I think it's like important to think about, and I think a lot about, this idea of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. There's sort of frameworks for
Mhm.
how you deal with this. And in my head, I'm kind of thinking of this as like an uncertain kind of problem to solve. And what, the thing is, just like research as much as you possibly can. But, it's like going back and forth to like balancing that, how much of a risk is this? If we are wrong, what does this mean for the business? In the case
Mhm.
of Nike, you try to sell that in the Middle East somewhere, and those shoes end up causing riots. That's a pretty big
Yeah.
deal. You take those damn shoes off the shelf as quick as possible. I don't know what Nike actually did, but I hope they did something like that. So anyway, I don't know. It's certainly something to think about. And then also too, I mean, the other thing I'm thinking about is every culture is different. It's hard to say, you know, it's hard to know where to even start. I mean, other than, look at your data, do your research, understand your
Yeah.
users, and make sure you're building for the right people. But
There
I
was
don't
a
know. That's a
there was
hard
a
one.
campaign that went fairly viral recently. I don't know what the campaign was called, exactly. I might be able to find the link. But it was basically around how people with non-British names had red squiggly lines underneath them, and it wasn't
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
recognizing it.
Right.
And, that in itself had so much, kind of years and years and years of kind of discrimination and things just sort of baked
Yeah.
into it, because, yeah, I'm sure that nobody intentionally, hopefully not,
Mhm.
designed it for like that. But there was another post as well that somebody posted a while ago about how she had a two-letter surname, and
Mm.
you might have liked it as well. And
I saw
and
this one. Yeah.
the input said must have a minimum of 3 characters, and she was like, "My surname is literally
Right.
2 characters." Or
Right.
sometimes form fields don't allow you to put kind of special characters in,
Hmm.
that aren't not like letters and things like that. And again, it's a case of that is completely allowing for different people, from all over the world. And if you don't allow that, then you're blocking X amount of people from signing up.
Yeah.
So yes, firstly, you're making people feel terrible, but secondly, from a business perspective, is you're not allowing those people to use your product or service.
Yeah.
So you can pull it back to that impact of, firstly, the
Right.
emotional impact you're going to have, and then also the direct tie to, it might just look like a form field, but if you do not allow those people to create an account, like, they're not going to be a user, a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the thing this might be different, but it's related. It was my name's not a typo, I think is what the
There's
campaign
a
was called.
few, there's a few
Something like
around.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
a
and,
couple.
yeah, anyway, so that's really interesting to think about too, and that's crazy because that's a lot of times, even like the system level, that's in like the operating system,
I know.
that's it's so deep, it's like you can't even control that, so, as a UX designer, how do you control that? You probably can't. All right, so we got a question from Liz. So sorry, everybody that's listening. For some reason, there's like weird technical things. LinkedIn I'm monitoring, but it's not refreshing. So I had to like refresh and I saw a bunch of questions pop up. So I apologize for that. We had a question from Liz, Baranowitz. Sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What are or are there ways or techniques to get all the team and stakeholders on board with documentation? And sometimes, feels like there can be pushback from stakeholders. So we actually had somebody submit a question about this as well. So similar, trying to get people on board, but they push
Mhm.
back. I know I've had stakeholders in the past like, oh, that's a load of crap. That's we're not gonna worry, but that's not MVP. That's something I hear all the time.
Mhm.
What are some ways to get those stakeholders on board when you get that pushback?
Yeah, so I think there was kind of a bit two parts of it. I think it was came through when we were talking about product board and Jira and Notion and all
Mhm.
of that wild conversations we're talking about. Um, so I think that even
Exhilarating
though
stuff here on Beyond UX.
um, you made me lose my train of thought. So on
Sorry.
She made me lose my
We were
train of
talking about pushback from
Yes,
stakeholders on
okay.
stuff. Yeah.
So,
Did
yes,
I ask you
even
that? I
though
don't think I asked you that question. Hey, I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm
it's
not
all
gonna stop
right.
talking.
So even though we were talking about kind of documentation, the preferred things that I've used and things like that before, I've always found that generally you need to go where the people in the business are going as well.
Mhm.
Because sometimes with the best will in the world, even if you say like I'm documenting all of my insights and stuff here, if people don't use it and there's a huge behavior change in businesses, sometimes you're kind of fighting a losing battle, which is really hard to accept, but it
Mhm.
is true. So it depends what we're doing. But quite often, if we're talking about like research and documenting risks and things like that that have come up during research, then I'll put them in whatever tool of choice that the business is using them. But then I'll quite often try and make them like as accessible as I can to the stakeholders that I'm working with. So sometimes that might be like posting into Slack, or it might be just doing like a quite a lightweight deck or something that you distribute
Mhm.
around the business. Generally, Slack is the tool of choice that a lot of people have used, and we've had like a channel where people can see that quite easily and comment on it. And generally, then I've found that the easier that people find things, like physically are able to find and see things,
Mhm.
the more they engage with it, and the more likely
Yeah.
that they realize that this stuff is happening,
Yeah.
rather than us kind of in a silo or look
Yeah.
like we don't know what designers are doing, and we don't know what researchers are doing, and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, the second half of your question, which was I think about general pushback,
Yes, pushback from stakeholders, just like, that's not something we need to worry about. That's MVP, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
that's a really big question. But generally, I guess without trying to repeat what I said earlier, was is always trying to objectify it and try and
Yeah.
say, like, yes, we might be pushing back, but generally what I like to try and do is I've realized I've just said generally about 5 times in one sentence, but generally what I like to do is I try and present like multiple versions if I've got time and headspace as well. I appreciate
Mhm.
that sometimes it's a crunch time and you just need to get something out. But what I like to try and always do is give myself a little bit of space, and will quite often overestimate a little bit by how
Mm.
long something will take me, so that I can come back with kind of a version MVP, a version 1.1, or whatever it is, and say, this is not going to be that much more effort, but it'll have this much more value, or this will have this much more value, and this is why. So, yes, this is MVP, but if we can stretch a little bit more, then we can do this thing. Because a lot of the time,
Yeah.
if you show someone one thing, you I'm not saying we have to do a bunch more work, but I'm just saying what I found in the past has been helpful
Mhm.
is if you show someone one thing, they kind of land on it. Whereas if you kind of give them choice, and sometimes engineers will come in and say, actually, that's not as much more effort than we thought it was, then that
Right.
helps to show what's on the table.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, this is where like having relationships with your engineers is really important, because then you could just ping them and be like, "Hey, don't spend too much time on this, but I got this question, blah blah blah. I'm thinking about this. What kind of like
Mm.
level of effort, And usually developers will underestimate, though. That's the thing you got to keep up. They'll say, "Oh, that's pretty easy," and then like they'll actually go to point it, and it'll be like an 80-point story, and
Yeah,
but
there has been times before though where I have been told, I guess, by a PM that this has nothing to do with anti PMs or anything, but I've kind of been told by a PM before, like we don't have time to do that, but then
yeah,
have shown engineers and they've been like, this will literally take no
right,
time at all to do
yeah,
that. Like
exactly,
let's
yeah,
or we think this is worth it too. And
yeah,
it's like not trying to create a dynamic of he said, she said, or anything like that. It's
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah,
we have like a three-legged stool, I guess. So engineer, PM, and designer, how I've worked really well in the past, is to get all of those different perspectives. Because as you said, sometimes what we might think on the surface is really a lot more work is not at all.
hmm
Or
yeah,
with the in-post example that I gave earlier, that little checkbox, that can be a huge amount of effort to be
right,
added. So it's
right,
all about trying to figure out yes, the feasibility of it, obviously the viability. I know that's
Yeah.
the whole point of design anyway, but trying to show those different options, I think, is really, really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, you bring up a good point too about just having allies in general, right? I mean, the ally could be the engineer, the ally could be the product manager trying to influence a stakeholder. It might be another engineer and influencing another engineer, whatever. But this is something I just generally influence. Like if you're trying to convince someone of something that they don't agree with, there's techniques there, and we don't have to dig into it because we don't have that much time. But, like dividing and conquering, I find to be really helpful. One-on-ones, we were talking about the thing. But then also I go back to this idea, and I've always thought this was super bizarre, where people will say, we've got business needs and we've got user needs.
Yeah.
And it's like, how are those things not aligned? It makes no sense to me. If I have a user and they're paying for software, a happy user is a paying user, which is good for the business. And it's always been just such a bizarre thing. Like helping users will somehow hurt the business. It's just a weird thing. But I think
Yeah.
the thing is, like, you're not going to influence some business side stakeholder that, like, we need to help the user if you can't tie that back. Just like you said, objectively showing, if we do this, we will increase revenue, blah, 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 or decrease something, or we risk something. And it's tying that back and forth. I
I
don't know.
guess it's really hard. I think there's two things in this. Firstly, the best relationships I've ever had in businesses have been with like support, customer success, and
Oh, yes.
onboarding managers and things, because they talk to customers all the time.
Yeah.
And yes, we as designers and things, we will do like outbound research to try and figure out something in a particular space, whether it's like a discovery or usability testing or whatever. But they
Mm-hmm.
give so much inbound research. Yes,
Yeah.
more on the B2B kind of side rather than other side, but they can give us so much insights around how
Yeah.
people are actually using things, and some of those
Yeah.
kind of weird and wonderful scenarios of those kind of like unhappy paths of, oh, somebody wants to do it this way, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
On the second point, which I can't remember, what was I going to say? What did we just talk about?
I can't remember. I don't remember I have no idea. I don't know. I'm just going.
I'm just going to put it down to my ill
It's
brain.
just, yeah, you're sick. It's okay. You got a cold. I don't blame you. Well, if you figure it out, just let us know, blurt it out and interrupt me. Yeah. So it's funny. I had a thought and then I just lost the thought too. I can't remember what I was going to say. But yeah, I think it's just one of those things where, like, you've got to understand that's where, like, tying, speaking like a business, thinking like a business, this is sort of where all that stuff comes into play. Because when you design for the happy path, it's often very obvious. It's when you're trying to do things that these other people don't want to do, when it's not obvious. And if you can't make that connection, you're not going to influence those other people. And I think that's incredibly important for everybody to know. So we've got about 10 more minutes left until the top of the hour. I wanted to ask you before, well, I've got some silly little this or that questions. Last time you were on, I asked you 5 questions about favorite book, favorite non-design book, podcast, all that stuff. This time I've got some little this or that questions for you. But before we do that, I want to give you an opportunity. Anything else that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you think is just incredibly important for everybody to understand about accessibility, edge cases, and all that stuff before we get out of here?
I remembered what we were going to say is when
Oh,
we say
go ahead.
like user needs and business needs, there
Yeah.
have been absolutely cases before where in your gut, you know that something is great to do, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
difficult to almost like justify and make the case
Mm-hmm.
to work on it, because it doesn't directly tie to it's going to like unlock this revenue or this revenue. And that's where it becomes a bit of a tension, because from a user experience perspective, it's going to be great, or it's going to help with like loyalty or trust or whatever. But it's so hard to objectively put a number on trust and loyalty,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't. You're just going to
Yeah.
say, well, actually, I believe in my gut and best
Yeah.
practice X, Y, Z. Obviously,
Yep.
the more of an investment it is, it's the harder. So
Yeah.
if you said to me, can I borrow £1? I'd be like, yeah, here you go, or $1, I guess. But
A
if you
pound.
said £1, but if you said to me, can I borrow £10,000? I'd be like, oh, maybe not, Jeremy. And it's the
Yeah.
same with design. If we say, can
Yeah.
we build a tiny thing? Yeah, the risk and
Mm-hmm.
payment for it is really small. But if it's going to take months and months, then you want to know that
Right.
it's going to have a positive impact on the business. The last thing, I guess, to round it up is I talk a lot about this umbrella term of risk. But generally, what I want to try and talk about is thinking about everything that makes people human. So the importance of emotions in design, like I think that emotional design is really not talked about enough. There's not a whole lot of content online about it other than kind of Don Norman's pyramid of needs. And behavioral design, I think behavioral psychology is absolutely fascinating. You know, what people say they do versus what they actually do is so different, and thinking about context and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, whenever you can, if you can, think about what can go wrong, how are people using things, how could they misuse things, who are we positively or negatively impacting in whatever way.
Yeah.
But also as well, you know, like we can't design for everyone, so don't feel terrible about it. It can be quite heavy sometimes to think about what can go wrong all the time, but we're all doing the best that we can, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I actually remembered what I was going to say, and it was about what you mentioned about service design. And this is something I think that service designers and the practice of service design and overall customer experience has a huge opportunity. And if you don't have service designers in your team, you could at least go out and try to mimic some of these things that they do. But that touch point that you talked about, right, with the customer success team, that's not something a UX designer would ever think about. That is absolutely something a service design team would think about, because that's a huge touch point and that's a
Mhm.
moment that matters. And that's something you definitely want to track. So, that's something I think, thinking about service design, this is why I love service design and customer experience in general, is you can go out and find those things, and they have metrics and they have methods to
Yeah,
track that, and tie it again with like marketing and all these other things where you can actually measure brand loyalty and trust and all that stuff. The trouble is most teams are completely segregated, and the
yeah,
UX design and software team has nothing to do with the marketing team, nothing to do with the service design team. And, it's just basically handing over documents over a wall and hoping someone goes and builds something that fits, and generally service design teams don't have a lot of teeth, has been
yeah.
my experience. So they can't make those things happen. So anyway, I just want to call that out. I think that's just like a really important thing. I think it helps with a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, especially
Absolutely.
when those edge cases can make or can break those relationships.
Yeah.
All right, so awesome. So we've got some silly little 20 little this or that questions that I like to ask everybody on the live events. I've got some special ones today because you're in the UK, and I think these are hilarious. And I'm just curious what someone from the UK thinks. Don't forget, stick around to the end for a 25% off coupon for the Beyond UX Design shop. You'll get that if you stick around, or if you watch the YouTube video later, but don't tell. Okay, so first up, this or that question: dog or cat?
Definitely a dog. Yeah.
All right, Netflix or YouTube?
Netflix.
All right, phone call or text?
A phone call.
All right, when you're presenting, do you like a big crowd or do you like small crowds? Intimate, nice little intimate setting.
Oh, I don't know. I like to see people's faces. So doing this live now freaks me out because I
Yeah,
can't
it's weird.
you
I
can't
know
see
it's weird.
anyone's reactions. You
Yeah.
can't see if people are like, "Oh yeah, this is going well," or I
Oh, they're
think
all laughing their ass off the entire time I saw them. I just don't think.
there's no one here anymore. I think I probably prefer a small crowd because I get quite nervous, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's funny because I was talking with somebody the other day, Karen Madhouse, actually, a fellow Brit, and she was at the Taylor Swift concert, and she sent me a picture of the show, and I was just like, I can't imagine being Taylor Swift and playing to just like, it's like at that point, it's almost like no one's there because you can't see a thing. It's so freaking big. It's just so bizarre. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of funny. All right, X or TikTok?
Do you know what? I have never used X or Twitter or anything ever. I've
Really? What about
never.
TikTok? Never use
Yeah,
TikTok?
I will take TikTok, but I never got into Twitter.
Really? I don't know how you missed that boat. That was like
I
everybody's
just
on Twitter.
I remember once, like, I tried it for a tiny amount of time when I was much younger, and somebody followed me, and I literally messaged them like, "Hey, I'm sorry, do I know you?" Because I didn't get the concept of followers.
That's so funny. Yeah, who are you? Why are you voting? That's
And then I was like,
hilarious.
"Oh, it's supposed to you're not really supposed to know the people, okay."
Yeah, that's so funny. I love it. All right. Pen or pencil?
Pencil,
All right. On your paper or your notebook, dot graph or lines?
dots,
All right. This one is really important. Please don't get this one wrong. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars. Sorry, is that not
Yeah,
the right
that's
answer?
the wrong answer. Damn it. That's okay. All right, I've got 5 questions here about England, Great Britain, the UK, and I'm really curious what someone from the UK has to say about this. First, this one's really important. Is it agile or agile?
Agile.
Okay. Scotch or Irish whiskey?
Ooh, I'd probably say Irish whiskey.
All right.
So,
American football or football?
are you talking about like soccer as in football?
Yeah, that's the joke. There's a play
So like,
football.
yeah, like rugby or football, basically.
Well, American football, where they, we're not as manly. We have to wear pads and helmets.
Well, maybe, yeah. See, I'm not that many people know this, but I'm actually Welsh, so I'm a real rugby person through and
Oh,
through.
watch out. Okay, so I said
I
England,
don't
and
have a Welsh
that's very
accent, which I'm
offensive to you.
really
Yeah.
upset about.
It's funny. We were joking about like British accents before, and I have no idea what a Welsh accent sounds like. I couldn't even tell you. I mean, like, wow, she sounds very Welsh. I have
Not
no
like
freaking
this,
clue.
I can guarantee it. I have
Yeah.
the most like neutral British accent, I think.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go there. I absolutely have like a really funny fake British accent. We're not gonna do. All right, this one's really important. I don't want you to get kicked out of the UK for this one, but I don't know how you answer this. But Meghan Markle or Kate Middleton?
Oh, what a spicy question.
Do you want
Oh,
to pass?
can I pass that one?
All right, these are really important. All right, these are design related. You always have to sing instead. Actually, this one's not design related. You always have to sing instead of speaking wherever you go. Singing or dance. Wait, this was a oh shit. I'm like totally misread. Sorry. You always have to sing instead of speaking or dance wherever you go. So sing everywhere you go or dance wherever you go.
I
It's
feel
a
like
weird question.
dance because you
I
can
need to add
kind of like
music.
dance ironically, whereas singing you can just be really bad at it.
Like order a Starbucks while you're dancing. All right, so this one's somewhat related. Only be able to conduct user research through interpretive dance or through haiku poems. It's the only way you conduct research is interpretive dance or haiku.
I feel like interpretive dance would be way more fun.
I actually this one last time with Kaylee, and this one's hilarious to think about. Like, if would you be the one doing interpretive dance, or do you ask a normal question and the user has to give you their answer in a haiku poem or interpretive dance, or is it both ways where you have to have a conversation with interpretive dance? Either way, I feel like this could be a hilarious like Saturday Night Live
That
skit
should be
or
your
something. I don't.
next Beyond UX live interview. Your next
All right.
episode, do that.
Last question. This one is a tough one. Would you rather have your designs critiqued by Gordon Ramsay or Simon Cowell? Two very mean Brits.
Gordon Ramsay, so they can call me an idiot sandwich.
I love it. All
Yeah.
right, that is all my questions. Emily, before we get out of here, let everybody know where they can find you, give yourself a plug, and all that stuff.
Yeah, so on LinkedIn, that is the only place so far. I am considering doing a newsletter. I'm not really sure if I should or not, so I would love any feedback on whether that's actually helpful if people want that or not, to be honest. But mainly LinkedIn. Hey Colton, just seen you in the comments. Business is going
Oh, what's
all
up,
right,
dude?
thank you. Might have my first client, which is very, very
Ooh, all
it's
right. Congrats.
TBD, but very exciting. But yeah, mostly just on LinkedIn. Feel free to send a DM, or always keen for like coffee chat or anything like that.
I love it. And does ampersand have? Do you have a URL yet, or is it just? You said you were building in public last time when we did the show a
Yeah.
couple weeks ago. You didn't
Yes,
have a website yet. Do you have the website? Can you give it? I don't want to throw you under the bus if you don't,
you
but I
did.
also want to make sure you. Oh shit. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so just check out Emily on LinkedIn, and if you need her, if you want to hire her, you can find her there, and I'm sure she'll tell you how to make that happen.
I have a company page, but that's about it. Yeah, I'm going to be very much embracing the whole building in public kind of thing.
I love it.
I think it's really difficult when you go from somebody that's been employed their whole life to then starting a business because you don't really have any work that's from the business to show that like this is what the business has done.
Yeah.
So my website is very, very bare bones, but I'm going to be getting that out at some point this year.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, I've got a little thing I'm going to read. You want to stick around for a minute? Because I honestly like turning your camera off. I'm fumbling around with the interface here. It'd be a lot easier if I just read this. Is that okay? Do you mind? All right. So everybody listen, I hope we helped shed a little bit of light on this idea of edge cases and accessibility and universal design. I think this is so important. And I think it's often an afterthought. But I'd love to know your experiences here. If we didn't get to your question, I can't remember. There were some people in there. I think we didn't get to a couple of the last few questions. We'll do our best to try to answer those afterwards. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, for the love of God, tell somebody about it. That would be amazing. That would be awesome. And if you are you ready for that 25% off coupon? Emily, you ready? You ready?
Me,
All right.
yes.
Are you ready? All right. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop. Pick up some big, beautiful UX themed art prints and digital downloads that you can print yourself. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code. Are you ready? This is very clever. Live. Use the code live to get 25% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop and get your print on. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, even episodes before they're released. You can get instant access right now and watch Emily's video with me, our whole interview, for $5. That's a goddamn good deal, if I do say so myself. Sign up for the newsletter. Check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. And I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design, because remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. We'll see you around. Take care, y'all. All right. I'm gonna do the outro. You stick around and we can chat for a minute, and then we'll be done. I gotta figure out where's the video. There it is. All right. We'll see you. Thanks, y'all.